What if I told you that there's a secret language only the chosen ones can hear, and that this language manifests itself precisely through what society calls addiction? That the pain you try to erase through any compulsion isn't weakness, but the encrypted language of your soul begging to be heard. Carl Jung discovered something disturbing. The most conscious people, those destined for something greater, are the ones who suffer the most. And they suffer because they feel too much, because they see too much, because they carry a burden that others don't even perceive exists. Addiction is not just a wrong turn, it's a disguised calling, a cry from the shadow demanding integration. While society condemns and judges, Jung revealed, addicts are wounded warriors on the battlefield of their own psyche, fighting an invisible war that few have the courage to face. In this video, you'll discover why your dependency might be the portal to your greatest transformation, and how the chosen ones have always known this. You didn't choose the pain chose you. And that's the first thing you need to understand if you want to decode what's really happening beneath your compulsions. Most people walk through life with a cushion between them and reality. They feel just enough to get by, sense just enough to function, and hurt just enough to complain, but not enough to change. But you're different. You feel everything at 10 times the intensity. The world crashes into you like waves against a cliff, and there's nowhere to hide. Jung understood this deeply through his concept of sensitivity and psychological depth. Some souls are born with thinner skin, with hearts that bruise more easily, with minds that can't stop analyzing and feeling and absorbing everything around them. This isn't a design flaw, it's a design feature. But nobody tells you that when you're young and drowning in feelings you can't name. Nobody pulls you aside and says, the reason you hurt more than others is because you're meant for something more than others. Instead, you learn quickly that this intensity is something to hide. You watch people around you handling life with ease, smiling through situations that tear you apart inside, and you think there's something broken in you. So you find something, anything, that turns down the volume. Maybe it numbs the feelings. Maybe it gives you a brief moment where the static in your head finally goes quiet. Maybe it makes you feel normal for once, like everyone else who seems to glide through existence without this crushing weight. But here's what Jung discovered about the psyche. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in symptoms, it speaks in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in inexplicable fears, and yes, in compulsions. Your addiction isn't random. It's not a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It's your unconscious mind screaming at you in the only language it knows. And the message is always the same. Something is unresolved, something is unfaced, something deep within you is demanding attention. The intensity you feel isn't your enemy, it's your compass. Think about it. The people who sleepwalk through life never feel the need to escape because they're already escaped. They're already numb, they're already half asleep. But you can't sleep. You can't pretend. You can't ignore the depths because you live in them. And that's precisely why you reach for something to make it bearable. Jung talked about the wounded healer. The idea that those who suffer most deeply often become the ones who heal others. But before the healing comes the wound. And before you understand the wound, you have to stop running from it. Your compulsion is a bridge between two worlds, the world you show everyone and the world that lives inside you. It's trying to connect them, even if it does so in the most destructive way possible. Every time you reach for your escape, you're actually reaching for yourself. You're trying to touch something real, something that makes sense of the chaos. The tragedy isn't that you're addicted. The tragedy is that you're addicted to the wrong medicine. You're trying to heal a spiritual wound with a material solution. You're trying to fill a void that was never meant to be filled with substances or behaviors, but with meaning, with purpose, with the integration of all the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because if the pain chose you, then maybe it chose you for a reason. Maybe the universe or fate or whatever you want to call the force that shapes human destiny looked at your soul and said, "This one can handle depth. This one can go into the darkness and come back with light, but that journey terrifies you, so you stay at the entrance to the cave, medicating yourself just enough to not have to go in, but never far enough to actually escape." The chosen ones throughout history have always been the ones who couldn't ignore the call. They're the ones who felt too much, questioned too much, suffered too much to just accept the surface level of existence. And every single one of them had to face their own version of this pain. The difference between those who transform and those who stay trapped isn't the presence of pain. It's what they do when they finally realize the pain isn't the problem. The pain is the doorway. Now that you understand the pain chose you, you need to grasp what you're really hungry for. And this is where Jung's psychology intersects with something much older and deeper than modern medicine wants to admit. Your addiction isn't about the substance or the behavior. It's about the hole inside you that nothing seems to fill. And Jung had a name for what that hole is really craving: the numinous, the transcendent, the divine. He studied addiction extensively and corresponded with the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, sharing a crucial insight. Addiction is a spiritual crisis disguised as a physical one. When you're trapped in compulsion, you're not weak, you're not lacking discipline. You're starving for an experience of something greater than yourself, something that makes sense of your existence, something that finally feels real and true and whole. Think about what happens in those moments right before you give in to your compulsion. There's a feeling of emptiness that becomes unbearable, a restlessness that crawls under your skin, a sense that something is fundamentally missing, and if you don't fill it right now, you'll disappear into the void. That feeling? That's not chemical dependency talking. That's your soul crying out for connection to something infinite. Jung understood that modern life has stripped away the sacred. We live in a world that tells us everything can be explained, measured, and controlled. But your psyche doesn't believe that lie. Deep in your unconscious, you know there's more. You can feel it in those rare moments when a sunset stops you in your tracks, or a piece of music brings tears you can't explain, or you wake up from a dream that felt more real than your waking life. Those glimpses of the transcendent are what you're really chasing every time you reach for your escape. The cruel irony is that compulsive behavior gives you a taste of what you're looking for. For a brief moment, it transports you out of ordinary consciousness. It gives you relief from the prison of self-awareness. It offers a feeling of expansion, of release, of finally being free from the relentless grip of your thinking mind. This is why it's so powerful. It's not just pleasure you're seeking, it's a counterfeit religious experience. Throughout human history, people have used altered states to connect with the divine. Rituals, fasting, meditation, prayer, sacred ceremonies. These were all paths to transcendence, to touching something beyond the small self. But we've lost those containers. We've lost the cultural frameworks that once held space for the mystical, so your psyche tries to create transcendence through whatever means available. And in a culture that sells escape in a bottle, or a pill, or a screen, that's what you reach for. But here's what separates the destructive path from the transformative one: context and intention. A compulsion takes you out of yourself without taking you anywhere meaningful. It's transcendence without transformation. It's escape without arrival. You leave your normal consciousness, sure, but you don't enter anything sacred. You just enter numbness, chaos, or temporary pleasure that leaves you more empty than before. Jung believed the psyche is always trying to move toward wholeness. Every symptom, every dream, every compulsion is the unconscious trying to push you toward integration. Your hunger isn't wrong. Your direction is wrong. You're trying to find God in things that can't hold God. You're trying to experience infinity through finite means, and your soul knows this. That's why the satisfaction never lasts. That's why you need more and more, because you're using the wrong key for the door you're trying to open. The founders of Alcoholics Anonymous understood this when they made connection to a higher power, the core of recovery. They weren't being preachy. They were being practical. They recognized what Jung told them: you can't overcome a spiritual crisis with willpower alone. You need to redirect the hunger toward what it's actually craving, not away from transcendence, but toward real transcendence. Not away from escape, but toward transformation. This is the bridge between where we've been and where we're going next. Because once you recognize that your compulsion is misdirected spiritual hunger, you start to see that everything you've been running from is actually what contains the sacred you've been seeking. The darkness you're avoiding isn't empty. It's full of the very meaning you've been craving, and that darkness has a name in Jung's psychology. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The darkness you've been running from has a face, and Jung called it the shadow. This isn't some mystical concept meant to sound profound. It's the most practical and terrifying part of his psychology. Your shadow is everything about yourself that you've decided is unacceptable. Every feeling you've been taught to suppress, every desire you've been told is wrong, every part of your personality that doesn't fit the image you need to maintain. All of it gets pushed down into the basement of your psyche, locked away where you don't have to look at it. But here's the thing about basements: just because you stop looking doesn't mean what's down there stops existing. In fact, it gets stronger, it gets louder, and eventually it finds a way to make itself known. Your compulsion is one of the ways your shadow speaks. When you can't stop yourself from doing the thing you swore you'd never do again, that's not you failing. That's your shadow taking control, because you've ignored it for too long. Most people think the shadow is just the bad parts of themselves, the anger, the jealousy, the selfishness. But Jung understood it's more complex than that. Your shadow also contains your power, your creativity, your authentic desires. It holds everything that didn't fit into the neat little box society handed you labeled acceptable human being. Maybe you had to hide your intensity because it made others uncomfortable. Maybe you learned to dim your light because shining felt dangerous. Maybe you buried your true wants because they didn't match what your family expected. All of that buried material doesn't just sit quietly. It ferments. It builds pressure. And when it finally erupts, it often comes out sideways through behaviors you can't seem to control. This is why you can genuinely want to stop and still find yourself doing the exact thing you hate. It's not a willpower problem. It's that you're only using half of yourself to fight against the other half. And the half you're fighting against has been gathering strength in the darkness for years. Think about the moments when your compulsion takes over. Really examine them. There's usually a trigger, something that happened right before. Maybe someone dismissed you and you felt small. Maybe you achieved something and felt terrified of the visibility. Maybe you were alone and the silence became too loud. In those moments, something in you that you've been keeping locked away sees an opportunity to finally express itself, even if that expression is destructive. Jung spent his entire career trying to help people understand that you can't kill the shadow. You can't eliminate it through willpower or positive thinking or pretending it doesn't exist. The only way through is integration. You have to turn around and face what's been chasing you. You have to open the basement door and see what's down there. And this terrifies people more than anything, because they believe if they look directly at their darkness, they'll be consumed by it. But the opposite is true. The shadow only controls you when you refuse to acknowledge it. When you bring it into the light of consciousness, when you stop running and actually examine these parts of yourself you've rejected, something remarkable happens. They lose their power over you, not because they disappear, but because you finally understand them. You see that the monster in the basement is actually a part of you that just wants to be seen and heard. Your dependency is the shadow's way of forcing this confrontation. Every time you relapse, every time you break your own promises, your unconscious is essentially saying, you still haven't dealt with me. You still haven't looked at what's really happening here. And it will keep saying that, louder and louder, until you finally listen. This is why white-knuckling your way through recovery without doing inner work rarely succeeds long-term. You're trying to defeat an enemy that's actually a part of yourself asking for reconciliation. The path forward isn't about strengthening your defenses against the shadow. It's about lowering them. It's about getting curious instead of judgmental. When you feel the pull toward your compulsion, instead of immediately fighting it or giving into it, you pause and ask, what is this really about? What feeling am I trying to avoid? What part of me is trying to express itself? What would happen if I actually let myself feel what I'm feeling without medicating it away? This kind of inquiry is uncomfortable because it requires you to sit with the exact sensations and emotions you've been using your addiction to escape. But this is where transformation actually happens. Not in the escape, but in the staying. Not in the numbing, but in the feeling. Not in the running, but in the turning around to face what's been following you. And here's what Jung understood that most addiction treatment misses. The shadow doesn't just contain your personal rejected parts. It also contains the collective rejected parts of your culture, your family lineage, your historical moment. You're not just carrying your own unexpressed darkness. You're carrying generations of it, the shame your grandmother never processed, the rage your father swallowed, the grief your family never allowed. All of it lives in you, in your shadow, waiting to be acknowledged. This is why the chosen ones struggle so intensely with compulsion. You're not just dealing with your own psychological material. You're sensitive enough, open enough, deep enough to be carrying ancestral and collective wounds. Your psyche is trying to process trauma that isn't even fully yours. And when that becomes overwhelming, when the weight of all that unprocessed darkness becomes too much, you reach for relief. But relief isn't healing. Temporary escape isn't transformation. What your shadow actually wants isn't to be medicated into silence. It wants to be integrated. It wants you to stop rejecting these parts of yourself and instead bring them into conscious relationship. This doesn't mean acting out every dark impulse. It means acknowledging them, understanding them, and finding healthy ways to give them expression. When you stop fighting the shadow and start dialoguing with it, something shifts. The compulsion begins to lose its grip because you're no longer at war with yourself. You're learning to hold all of who you are with compassion instead of judgment. And this brings us directly to understanding why this struggle isn't random, why you specifically are dealing with this, and what it's preparing you for. Now you're beginning to see that your struggle with compulsion isn't a detour from your path. It is the path. Jung built much of his psychology on the structure of myths and stories that appear across all cultures, and at the heart of them all is the hero's journey. But here's what most people miss. The hero always begins as wounded. The journey doesn't start from strength. It starts from brokenness. Every great story follows the same pattern. The hero lives in an ordinary world, comfortable and unconscious. Then something happens, some call to adventure that disrupts everything. And almost always the hero refuses that call at first. They don't want to leave comfort. They don't want to face the unknown. But life doesn't give them a choice. They're thrust into a journey they never asked for. And in the midst of that journey, they're broken down, tested, pushed to their absolute limits. Your compulsion is that breaking down. It's not the enemy of your hero's journey. It's part of it. You've been called to something deeper, to a more authentic existence, to a level of consciousness that most people never reach. But you can't get there by skipping steps. You can't become who you're meant to be without first being shattered. And your addiction is doing the shattering. This sounds harsh, but Jung understood that the psyche uses whatever tools it has available to push you toward growth. If you're someone capable of profound transformation, if you're one of the chosen ones with the sensitivity and depth to do real inner work, then your psyche will create a crisis big enough to force that work. It won't let you sleep through your life. It won't let you stay comfortable in unconsciousness. And if you try to ignore the call, the crisis gets bigger. Look at your own story. Before things got bad, there were probably whispers, small signs that something wasn't right, a vague dissatisfaction with your life, a sense that you were meant for something more, dreams that hinted at depths you weren't exploring, but you probably ignored those whispers because they were easy to dismiss. So they got louder. The dissatisfaction became depression. The sense of something missing became anxiety. The dreams became nightmares. And finally, the compulsion became undeniable. This is how the hero's journey actually works. You're not being punished. You're being initiated. The wound isn't random. It's specifically designed to break open the parts of you that need to transform. Your particular struggle, your particular addiction, is targeting the exact areas where you're most defended, most unconscious, most in need of growth. It's finding the cracks in your armor and prying them wider, because that's the only way the light gets in. Jung talked about the wounded healer archetype, the idea that those who heal others must first be wounded themselves. But this isn't just about becoming a healer for others, it's about healing yourself. The wound teaches you things that comfort never could. It takes you into territories of the psyche that you'd never explore voluntarily. It forces you to develop capacities you didn't know you needed: humility, compassion, honesty, courage, the ability to sit with pain without running. Every hero in every story reaches a point called the dark night of the soul. It's the moment when everything seems lost, when the journey feels impossible, when going forward seems as terrifying as going back. You've probably had multiple dark nights. Maybe you're in one right now. And in those moments, it feels like failure. It feels like you're the one person who can't overcome this. Everyone else seems to have their life together while you're falling apart. But here's the secret that myths have been trying to tell you. The dark night isn't where the journey ends. It's where the real journey begins, because it's only when you've lost everything, when all your strategies have failed, when you're completely broken open, that you finally become teachable. You finally become willing to do something different. You finally stop trying to control and start learning to surrender. And surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving up the illusion that you can overcome this through force alone. It means admitting that you need help, that you don't have all the answers, that maybe the way you've been trying to solve this problem is actually part of the problem. This is the turning point in every hero's journey, the moment when the hero stops trying to be heroic and becomes human instead. Your wounds have made you human in a way that comfort never could. They've stripped away the pretense, the performance, the perfect image you were trying to maintain. And underneath all that, there's something real, something raw and vulnerable and true. That's what was waiting to be discovered all along. Not the person you thought you should be, but the person you actually are when all the masks come off. This is what separates the chosen ones from everyone else. Most people go through life avoiding their wounds, building bigger walls, creating more distance between themselves and their pain. But you can't do that. Your sensitivity won't allow it. Your depth won't permit it. You're forced to go into the wound, to explore it, to let it teach you. And that's not a curse, that's your initiation into a more conscious way of being. The hero's journey doesn't end with the wound. It ends with return and integration. The hero goes into darkness, faces their demons, claims their power, and comes back transformed to share what they've learned. You're in the middle of that journey right now. The descent into compulsion was necessary, the breaking was required, and the integration that's waiting on the other side is what you're actually being prepared for. Here's where everything you've learned so far converges into something practical, something you can actually use. Jung didn't just study psychology. He studied alchemy, the ancient art of transformation, and he realized that the alchemists weren't really trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing psychological transformation using the language of chemistry. They were mapping out how human consciousness evolves from its most broken state to its most whole. The alchemists had a phrase that Jung loved, in sterquiliniis invenitur. It means, in filth it will be found. The treasure, the gold, the thing of greatest value is always discovered in the place you least want to look. Your compulsion isn't just a problem to be solved. It's raw material for transformation. It's the lead that contains the gold. This completely flips how you've been taught to think about your struggle. Society tells you that addiction is purely destructive, something to be eliminated and forgotten. Get clean, move on, never look back. But Jung understood that approach misses the entire point. Your compulsion is showing you exactly where your work is. It's pointing directly at the parts of your psyche that need attention, integration, transformation. The alchemical process always begins with what they call the nigredo, the blackening. Everything has to break down first. All your illusions about who you are, all your carefully constructed defenses, all the stories you tell yourself about being fine. Your addiction has likely taken you there multiple times. Rock bottom, they call it in recovery circles. But what if rock bottom isn't the end? What if it's the necessary first stage of transformation? After the blackening comes the albedo, the whitening. This is where clarity begins to emerge from chaos. You start to see patterns. You begin to understand why you do what you do. The connections between your past and your present become visible. This is the stage where you're doing the work we've discussed, facing the shadow, understanding the hunger, recognizing the wound. You're bringing consciousness to what was previously unconscious. But clarity alone isn't enough. Knowledge without integration just becomes another way to beat yourself up. You understand your patterns, but you still can't change them. This is where so many people get stuck. The final stage, the rubedo or reddening, requires something more than understanding. It requires actual transformation of the energy itself. This is the real alchemy. You're not trying to get rid of the energy behind your compulsion. You're learning to redirect it. The intensity that drives you toward destructive behavior is the same intensity that can drive you toward creation, toward purpose, toward becoming fully yourself. The problem was never the intensity. The problem was that it had nowhere conscious to go, so it went underground and came out as compulsion. Think about the energy you've poured into your addiction, the planning, the hiding, the elaborate systems you've created to maintain it, the mental gymnastics, the emotional investment, the sheer force of will it takes to keep that pattern going. That's not weakness, that's tremendous power being channeled in the wrong direction. Imagine what happens when you take that same energy and point it towards something that actually serves you. Jung believed that every psychological problem contains within it the seed of its own solution. Your compulsion isn't separate from your healing. It's the distorted form of your healing trying to happen. The restlessness that drives you toward escape is actually the restlessness of your soul demanding expression. The hunger that seems insatiable is actually your deepest self crying out for meaning. But you can't skip straight to the gold. The alchemical process takes time. It requires patience with yourself. It demands that you stay present to each stage without trying to rush through to the end. You have to actually be in the nigredo when you're in the nigredo. You have to let yourself be broken down completely. This is why relapse isn't failure in the alchemical sense, it's information. Every time you return to the compulsion, you're being shown something. Maybe you rush the process. Maybe there's another layer of the wound that needs attention. The alchemists knew that transformation isn't linear. You circle back, you repeat steps, you go deeper each time. What makes someone ready for this work is curiosity. Instead of just trying to escape the pain, they start asking what the pain is trying to tell them. Instead of hating themselves for the compulsion, they get interested in what it's really seeking. This curiosity is the heat that drives the alchemical transformation. As you move through this process, something genuinely new begins to emerge. Not a better version of your old self, but an entirely different way of being. You stop seeing your sensitivity as a curse and start recognizing it as a gift. You stop viewing your intensity as a problem and start experiencing it as power. The very things you've been trying to eliminate become your greatest assets once you learn to work with them consciously. This is the medicine hidden in the poison. Your compulsion has been teaching you about the nature of desire, the mechanics of escape, the underground rivers of your psyche. It's given you a map of your own depths that most people never get to see. And once you understand how to read that map, once you know how to navigate those depths, you become someone who can guide others through their own darkness. The alchemist said the philosopher's stone couldn't be bought or borrowed. It had to be created through your own transformation. Nobody can do this work for you. They can guide you, support you, show you the stages, but you have to undergo the process yourself. You have to put your own lead into the fire. And here's the beautiful truth. You're already doing it. Every moment you've stayed conscious instead of numbing out, you've been doing the work. Every time you've felt the pull of compulsion and gotten curious about it, you've been practicing alchemy. Every dark night you've survived has been part of your transformation. The question isn't whether you can transform. The question is whether you're willing to trust the process. Whether you can have faith that this breakdown is actually a breakthrough trying to happen. Because on the other side of that fire isn't just recovery, it's rebirth. And that's what the chosen ones have always been called to. Not just to survive their wounds, but to be completely remade by them. Did this video make sense to you? Leave your opinion. Take care and see you later.